So here we are at Auschwitz I. This is the first part of the camp, and that's the famous main gate. The wording at the top there says "work sets you free" or "work makes you free." You all knew that wasn't true. But anyway, as you were brought into the camp, this is what was known as the Orchestra Wall. This would be where the inmates here would play orchestra music. The SS would force this as it would make the inmates easier to handle. It would be more relaxing for them, and it would also give you that impression that you weren't coming into a work camp. You were coming here to not suffer. Just opposite the Orchestra Wall, these blocks were the first blocks to ever been made here at Auschwitz I. They were first intended to house prisoners of war from the Soviet Union, aiming at about 10,000 prisoners. Most of them died from starvation and SS brutality. Anyone who refused to work or follow any orders was just marched out of the building into the snow naked, doused in cold water and left in the snow to freeze. That's how most of them died. So this is the first site of the first gas chamber that was actually built here in Auschwitz. They could kill up to 2,000 people an hour in this gas chamber. The screams could be heard from inside the camp, which is just over there behind that building. So in aid to try and stop this, the Nazis had an idea of lining up their motorbikes all along here and around the corner there, and when the screams were being heard they would rev their engines to drown out the sound of the screams. So we're just going to have a little look inside here now. You can still see some of the finger marks on the wall where people were desperately trying to get out. So let's have a look inside. So this is a perimeter fence separating the blocks of Auschwitz. All this barbed wire is original. You imagine how many people have touched this over the years, but during the time of Auschwitz this barbed wire would have been electrified. So if you'd have touched this you would have got a nasty electric shock. Just trying to imagine what this place was like. From the moment you woke up to the moment you went to bed, you was living in fear. Every second must have seemed like an hour. There was just SS everywhere, you know, up in the towers, between the blocks, in the blocks. You know, they just didn't wait for a reason to give you a hiding. They could just walk over to you and shoot you on the spot at any second, or just give you a beating for no reason whatsoever. This is what become to be known as Roll Call Square. Every morning a roll call will be conducted, and this is the main Roll Call Square along here. That's why it's slightly more wider than the other gaps between the buildings, so you'd have a few thousand people here every morning being counted and accounted for. This small tower was built for the SS officers who was doing the roll call of a morning. They were moaning that they were getting wet because it was raining some mornings, so they built this little tower for them to stand in so they could count the prisoners and do the roll call while all the rest of the prisoners were out here in the cold, the heat, the snow, the frost. But he could sit in there and have a cup of tea and do his roll call. So these are the gallows. These were installed by the Nazis for a way of intimidating the prisoners of war here. When they got up for their morning roll call, they would see 12 bodies hanging here every morning. It was just a way to send a message of don't try and escape, don't upset us, do as you're told. Not very nice. These could be people who have tried escaping during the night, people who have refused to work, or anyone aiding someone who was trying to escape were hung up here every morning. But this was the main roll call square here where we was a second ago. Their hanging used to be done by portable gallows, but they decided to erect this one as a better way to intimidate people. There was actually a priest here who was a inmate of the camp by the name of Maximilian Kalob. He actually volunteered to die for a man. The SS guards during the night heard a man crying for his wife and children. They stormed the block to try and find the man who was making the noise, and the priest actually stood up and volunteered to die for him. He said it was him that was crying for his wife and children, so he took the death penalty for the man. The man that he saved actually died in 1995, aged 93, and he had a lot more children and grandchildren, so you could say he saved the life of more than one person. So this is the famous Block 10. This is where men and women were used for experimental subjects for the German doctors. The experiments normally focused on body reactions to different substances, and also to try and work out the cause of sterilisation. Although Block 10 was the men's camps, the experiments conducted were mostly for women. And also, due to please the more elite prisoners, the Germans housed prostitutes in Block 10. These were for the non-Jewish prisoners, and the nickname for the brothel was called the Puff. Just a little nickname that went round so you knew what was being spoke about. It was designed to make non-Jewish prisoners work harder, motivate them, and give them a reward at the end of a good hard day's work. Towards the last few years of the war, the Nazis installed spy holes through the doors and through the walls so they could watch what was happening. So now you know what floats the Germans' boats. So most of the German doctors concentrated their time on the women here in the blocks. There was a doctor called Karl Klauberg. He focused on injections to try and work out how to sterilise people, and also to understand why some people couldn't have children. He would inject different substances into the woman's cervix to stop pregnancy, and he was also trying to unlock the key of how to make German women have 2 babies. So for every pregnancy in the motherland, a woman could give birth to 2 kids instead of 1. There was Bruno Weber. He tested different blood types by bleeding prisoners and injecting their blood into different people with different blood groups. There was August Hurst. He was responsible for organising the Jewish skeleton collection from 86 different prisoners to prove that the Jewish were a different racial difference to us. He also tested mustard gas on prisoners in this block as well. The victims at Auschwitz were also exported anywhere else where they needed test subjects, so they could go from here back into Germany or neighbouring countries, wherever they needed a guinea pig to do nasty experiments on. So this is the side of Block 11. This is where, down in the basement, where the standing cells are. That was a small, tiny little room, about a square metre by a square metre, with a 5 centimetre hole for breathing. You would be put in there with 3 or 4 other prisoners, and just basically you was in there till you die. So it was designed so you couldn't sit down. You had to stand up till you die before other people. So if you was the last one to go, you was in there with 3-4 dead bodies leaning up against you.
But it makes me want to stand up.
So this is block 11, how it became to be known as the death block. The block was used for executions and torture. Between blocks 10 and 11 stood the death wall. This is where thousands of prisoners were lined up and executed by a firing squad. So this is block 11. This was the favourite of the Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele. He was the chief of the barbaric research that took here from 1943 onwards. He also became to be known as the Angel of Death, performing a range of experiments on adults and mainly children. He was interested in twins, such thing as removing a limb from one twin to see if the other twin had any effect on the other twin. Also injecting chloroform into the hearts of one twin to see if they died at the same time or if they died in the same way. This is actually the house of the camp commandant Rudolf Hoss. He actually lived and worked here. This was his house and his offices. So his house was here, and that's Auschwitz I there. He actually tried to escape after the war, like most top Nazis did, but he was actually found and handed back over, and he was sentenced to death just across the road here, there. So Hoss actually lived over there, as I said, and he was taken out of his house. He actually asked for a cup of coffee in the morning and was quite calm. He came out of his house straight over to the gallows over here, and I'm just going to read you a little bit offline now of actually what happened. The prosecutor read out the sentence. The hangman placed a noose around Hoss's neck, and Hoss adjusted it with a movement of his head. When the hangman pulled the stool from under him, his body struck the trapdoor, which opened, leaving Hoss hanging. A priest began to recite the prayer for the dying. It was 10:08 AM and a doctor pronounced Hoss dead at 10:21. His remains were probably cremated. The newspapers didn't really mention the hanging because at this point it was decided that this was going to be the last hanging of any Nazi war criminals, because the last previous were turning into a bit of a circus. You had the press turning up, you had people selling ice creams and hot dogs and children attending. It was just becoming too much of a public exhibition, so this was actually the last hanging of a Nazi war criminal. There was actually 170 female SS officers in Auschwitz. One of the most infamous was called Gia of Auschwitz. At the end of the war, she was convicted of war crimes against humanity and sentenced to death at just the age of 22. So this is Auschwitz II Birkenau. This is where the actual town of Birkenau actually stood until the Nazis came and tore it down and built this horrendous place. But this was the become the main area for the concentration camp number 2. That's the famous archway where the trains carrying the Jews would have entered. They would have entered on the carriages all the way up this railway here, and this is where what they called the ramp. This is where the Nazis doctors, and I'll say that term loosely, decided if you lived or die. But one thing I sort of didn't realise a little while ago is these carriages that are coming up just here, people would have been on these carriages for 2 or 3 weeks before they even got here, not even getting out. No sunlight, no food, a bucket in the corner to use for the loo, but basically you would have been, well, a lot of them would have been dead already before they got to this point. So the carriages would have pulled up here, your doors would have been flung open, Nazis would be just shouting at you, off, off, off. Your luggage would have been taken off of you. That would have all been starting to be sorted down here. There's actually a picture here of the 2 lines of people being sorted. You'd have been set into 2 lines, men this side, women this side. The SS doctors would have been stood just about where those people are, and they would have been saying left and right. Now the meaning of left and right, if you got sent to the left over this side, that would have been you'd have been sent to work, basically work until you die in the campsite over there. If you were sent to the right, that would have been down to the bathhouses, which was actually the gas chambers, and that would have been anyone unfit for work, women, children, disabled, elderly, or if they just didn't like the look of you, to be honest. But there used to be Jewish prisoners of wars here that the Nazis made work, but as the lines of people were here, they would have been mingling in with the people in Yiddish. They would have been giving clues. They would have been saying, you're 18 and you've got a trade. You know, you're 18, 19, you've got a trade. And so when you got to the front with the doctors, you could say, I'm 18 and I'm a carpenter. And then you got some use to them and you would have been pointed left into the camp. But 90% of the people were pointed right across this junction here and led up to the bathhouses. But you wouldn't have known what was going on until it was too late. They would have used the excuse that you've been on the train for so long, you need disinfecting, so you're going to go for a shower. So these are the remains of the gas chambers that was here at Auschwitz II. So once you've taken off the train transport, if you were unfit for work, you would have been pointed right, and you would have took the long walk up the path there. You would have then been marched over here. Don't forget, you've been separated from your loved ones, your children. Oh, imagine what they were going through. But you would have been marched up here under the pretense of you was going for a shower, a bath, disinfectant, as you've been on the train for so long. So this was the entrance. The people would have been marched up here. You can just see the steps there. That's where you'd have come down, and you would have been gone down into an underground changing room. This would have been the changing rooms here. You were then told to undress fully, and it would have been imprinted into your mind, remember where you left your belongings for when you come out. Remember where your belongings are, your clothes. So they were getting it into your head that you were coming out. There was nothing to fear. Then you were marched into the gas chamber just up there. The door would have been shut behind you. The shower heads on the roof, 90% of them were fake. The little trap door would have been opened and pellets of Zyklon B would have been dropped in, and unfortunately that would have been the end for you. But the Nazis blew this up at the end of the war, when they knew time was nearly up, when the Russians, Americans and everyone else was nearly here. They were trying to cover it up, but this is as far as they got. On this site here was nicknamed Canada. This was where the expensive luggage of what they stole off the Jews was brought, the gold, the watches, jewellery. If you could get a job in here, if you were as an inmate here at Auschwitz, that was quite handy, because if you could get a little gold ring away, or a diamond, or an expensive watch, it was a risk taking it away. If they caught you, they'd kill you on the spot, but then you could get that gold back into the camp and give to your other inmates to barter with the Nazi guards for food or favours. But this was the site of Canada, one of the most sought after jobs between the inmates. So this is the monument to the victims of Auschwitz. Monument commemorating the victims of Auschwitz was erected on the grounds of the former Birkenau camp in 1967. Physically and symbolically, the monument marks the end of the road during the war which led to the gas chambers. These plaques have got the text of the principal languages spoken by the deportees of Auschwitz. So you've got Ukrainian, Serbian, Slovak, Romanian, Romani, Russian, Polish, Norwegian, Dutch, Hungarian, Yiddish, Italian, Croatian, Hebrew, Greek, French, German, Czech, Bulgarian, Slovak, Luxembourgish, and last of all English. This is the brick barracks. These were designed to have between 700 to 1,000 people in them, but most of the time there was a lot more. Each of these bunks were designed to have 4 people in, but in reality you had 10 people in there at least every night. There was no comforts, it was just straw on these boards, no pillars, no blankets. Some even didn't have windows. And it's cold in here now, let alone when the snow's on the ground as well. You had these chimneys that you had, one at each end, to light a small fire in the bottom. That really wasn't sufficient enough to try and keep 1,000+ people at night warm. So you was here all night. Can you imagine just being here at night, sleeping, well, trying to sleep, not having much sleep, some people in the bunk with you dying next to you during the night, then you was up at 6 o'clock in the morning doing 10, 12, 15 hours a day, hard labour, minimal food, and then put back in here again to do it all over again, night after night. Just can't fathom it, just couldn't. Oh, these poor people. One thing I've never noticed before when I've come to Auschwitz are these here dotted along the perimeter outside. These are actually air raid shelters for the guards in the main gatehouse there and these towers along the perimeter. They were built in 1944 when the Auschwitz camp came within range of the American bombers flying from air bases in Italy. Polish resistance passed on reports of Auschwitz and the gas chambers here, but the Americans and the British never made it a target. They didn't want to be seen to bomb innocent civilians. Yeah, that's what these are, air raid shelters.